and welcome back to Planet Coaster 2 and welcome back to Malaya Bay. In this episode we're going to be building 2 raft slides, and these are heavily inspired by ones at Siam Park. One is called Volcano, which basically drops into a big bowl in the dark with lasers flashing everywhere, and that's probably partially named the way it is because of the volcano, obviously, in Tenerife. And the other slide is going to be inspired by the dragon, but instead we're doing it themed to a snake, so it's called King Cobra in this one, and we work on the King Cobra slide first. Rather than using the big funnel like the dragon has, I decided to use a piece that looked like it could kind of be almost like a snake skin, and then I just build a serpent at the top of that funnel section, which you will see a bit later on in the build. This is probably about my second or third go at building these slides, because I'm still just getting used to the physics. Obviously in the first episode I built a drop slide that's really simple to make. You're just building basically a huge drop, whereas with this one, or with these ones rather, it took a little bit more engineering to sort of work out the building engine for the water slides and the physics and everything like that. So to be honest, the Cobra slide runs fairly slow, whereas the Volcano is pretty fast. Not the most realistic, but aesthetically I think they end up looking really good, especially with these sections sort of tunnelling in and out of the terrain. And once we get them coloured correctly, I think everything starts looking sort of how I envisioned it. And then I'm able to sort of progress with the build, a little bit of modification to get the slides working how I wanted, but these are pretty much the final versions as far as I can remember. You can see that I've put the pools in at the bottom. There's a splash pool for each one of these to land in, which you would typically see on a raft slide like this, and I did those by using the sort of circle technique, by copying and rotating the path using the advanced move tool, or rather the pool sections using the advanced move tool. The only thing I did find a bit tricky is to get the speed that I needed for these slides to actually work. They have to start really high, so the top platform is probably higher than the actual tower slide, which wasn't really the intention, but with some clever trickery and lots of theming and foliage I managed to hide all of that stuff, so it's not really noticeable. This is like a whole other section of the park, and the only thing is the guests are going to have a long queue line to walk up to, but yeah, at this point I'm just sinking some rocks into the terrain, and that's pretty much it for the build of the slides. So the next thing I wanted to work on was the King Cobra, and this is somewhat an animatronic. I did originally want to have it sort of moving around, but then in the end I just settled for the tongue moving, which I think is fine. But it actually wasn't too tricky to build. The hardest thing about this was getting the shaping right. So to start with, I'm using these circular pieces. I don't even know what they are, to be honest. I'm not entirely sure, but they worked perfectly for the body of the snake. And then it looks a bit random here that I'm placing these big rag things down, these big carpets, but that's really just a guideline for the actual shape of the serpent's body, or the cobra's body rather. And then I build the entire body using rock pieces, the recolorable aquatic ones, one of the smaller ones, and sort of scaling them down and stuff, and it worked out perfectly for the body of this snake. And you can see how it's going to look, especially once I start recoloring some of the rocks to give it a little bit more of the variation of the texture. And I finally decided I would learn how to use the rotation tool to make my life easier, so that I only have to do one half of the snake and everything mirrors across. From what I've actually heard, The mirrored section are not real pieces. It's just an illusion. I don't know exactly how that works, but it's kind of cool because I guess it limits the piece count, especially for very piece intensive builds like this one. And it's actually really, really simple to do. You literally just place the rotating platform down and click on mirror and start building, and everything you do on one side gets perfectly symmetrically built on the other side as well. So it's definitely a technique that I'm probably going to use more going forward. And yeah, I've cut out quite a lot of this build from the time lapse because obviously it's very repetitive, just placing rocks and having to make sure that it looks good on the bottom and the top, because only one face of the rock looks good. So I've essentially duplicated every one of the rocks so that you can see the snake from underneath and from on top. And for the eyeballs, they are just a aquatic piece, one of the sort of submarine type, periscope type pieces. And yeah, I think they work good enough for eyes. It's just interesting sometimes to see what you can do with random pieces, using them in different ways like this. And for the actual tongue, there was a really useful sort of bamboo type piece, I think from the resort pack. And yeah, I just put a little animatronic on that, and yeah, it worked out perfectly in the end. And that's it for the snake. So the next part is probably my favourite part of the build, which is creating this whole environment. Once the slides got put in, you saw me do a little bit of this, but now we do absolutely loads of it because it's quite a big area to fill up. But because it's all sort of environment stuff, so your rocks and your foliage and all those type of scenery pieces, it doesn't take quite as long as if you're making buildings. I always find that this is a slightly more relaxing approach to theming in the game. And again, we wanted to sort of hide quite a lot of the supports and everything around these slides to sort of give it that feel that Siam Park has, where everything's weaving in and out of the trees, everything's rather mysterious, and you don't know necessarily what the flumes are going to do until you actually go down them, which is kind of cool. And then at this point, the new update launched just the other day, so I was able to recolour the pools, and I think they look a lot better with this darker blue colour. And once we've put a bit more theming in that area, you'll see how that kind of fits the theme a little bit better. Not probably going to do all the pools the same colour, and there will be a bit of variation throughout the park, so the drop tower slides got different coloured pools. But for these ones, yeah, we went for this darker blue. You can see I'm doing a little bit of path work there as well to make the landing pools accessible for the guests, and then theming up the area at the bottom of the slides. And because this is quite a key focal point for guests, I wanted to make sure it looked as beautiful as it possibly could. So rock work again, foliage, and yeah, I went back to look at some more reference images and realised that not everything's just tropical foliage. It's not just palm trees everywhere, so I decided to start adding in these flower beds as well, or these flower bushes, and just a tiny bit of colour variation there I think helps break it up a little bit more and give it a little bit more interest. But another thing I really had to be careful with here was the clearance for the flumes themselves, and especially the underground sections, even though a lot of, especially the volcano slide, is inside a tube, the trees obviously can still clip through. So I had to sort of do a few POVs myself to make sure that everything was looking okay, nothing was clipping through. So we get all that sorted, and then really it's just a case of duplicating quite a lot of stuff, or that there is a lot of copy and paste with these rocks, but just adding slight bits of variety, so a bit of scaling and rotation and stuff like that, so everything doesn't look exactly the same everywhere. And I think the bottom section here, where that sort of landing section for the flumes, is crafted quite nicely. I think it's going to be quite a nice view for the guests while they're watching their friends and family members come off the slides at the bottom of the pool. And we had kind of a section as well, quite a big section of land, just sort of parallel to the volcano, the pool for the volcano. So I decided to place in a small sunbathing area, which we haven't got any of yet in the park. This is something that we're going to probably be doing sort of all over the park, because obviously it's quite a big part of a water park, having sunbeds and spaces to relax when you're not going on the slides, or maybe family members that don't particularly want to ride. So we're just placing down some sunbeds and umbrellas, and then making a very, very simple custom table as well. I actually used a sort of modern resort fence here, and I wasn't entirely sure about it before I started placing it down, but it actually works out pretty well for this theme. I think it gives a more sort of modern Malaysian theme to it. For those that haven't seen the first episode, if you're just catching up now, the idea of this water park is that it's heavily inspired by Siam Park. However, it is to more of a Malaysian theme rather than a Thai theme, just so that we can have a bit more variation with the building style and do stuff that's a little bit more creative. And I think so far that's working out quite well, because it's giving me a real challenge to see what I can do with different pieces and see how I can replicate that theme. So the next thing I start working on is the flume platform, or the platform at the top. I don't know really what you call that, but yeah, the platform, I guess. I was really, really surprised with how well this turned out, because I wasn't at all sure how it was going to work, and it's the first time I've really sort of done anything like this in the game, doing this heavily themed sort of stuff in this way. So straight away you can see I'm doing the custom roofing, and to start with I was a little bit unsure because I went for these shiny pieces, and I wasn't sure really if that was going to be the right texture for this roof. But then the more I looked at it, the more I thought, yeah, actually that works quite well. And it is probably not something we'll do all over the park. Maybe there'll be one or two buildings like this, but then for most of them we'll just use ordinary sort of slate tiles, but still probably custom roofs so that we can get the shapes and everything like that we want, because obviously we don't have any themes similar to this in the game. Obviously I didn't want just one boring roof, I wanted a couple of different layers, so that added a little bit more challenge, working out how to fit all that together. And then it is a case of working out how best to decorate the roof, so adding some trims in, and to start with I thought this would be fine, but then I end up finding a piece that gives it far more detail and really makes the whole thing pop. So later on in the build you'll see this is much improved, but for the time being I'm just placing the Viking trims in, and I think the roof tiles themselves sort of symbolise what this theme is supposed to be aiming at, the more Asian style theming, whereas the Viking trims, they complement the roof tiles, even though they kind of represent a slightly different theme, but I think they work with all the way we've done it, combining these pieces, in my opinion. But yeah, it's always interesting trying to build a theme that isn't actually sort of prevalent in the game. But yeah, the next sort of challenge was covering up all the bits that I don't want you to see. And I find that can often be quite a challenge in Planet Coaster, because you can have things clipping through, and you want to hide all the not so nice bits in the background, especially when you're doing a custom roof like this with different layers and different levels and stuff like that. So I have a lot of playing about with that, and then get to the point where it's all looking pretty good. So adding in some custom details now, using this fence piece. I believe it's a fence piece, or maybe it's a bracket actually. I think it's a bracket I've rotated several times to make it into a square, and then just layering loads on top of each other to give it loads more detail. This is a very piece intensive building in the end. There's no sort of denying that. And we probably will have quite a lot of piece intensive buildings in the park, but it's not going to be the hugest park in the world, so I don't think it will really be a problem. Plus the game seems to be a hell of a lot more optimised than the first Planet Coaster game. We don't seem to be getting any frame drop at the moment using a leased GTI 3050 on GeForce Now. So yeah, it's always going to run better if you're just using someone else's rig, basically. Yeah, I have to. I did moan in the last video about GeForce Now, but I have to be quite grateful for it because it's pretty much the only way that I can actually play the game smoothly when I want to build like this. And it seems to be working pretty well actually over the last few days while I was working on this build. Didn't get too many crashes or anything like that. So now you can see the level of detail I've added to the trim. This is just using some, I'm not really sure what these pieces are, but some sort of detail pieces, but I think they might be like a Viking or mythology type spike that you'd have on the end of a sword type thing, not sword, but you know, and just placing loads of them, and again that ties the trims in with the rest of the theme quite well, I feel. And I just decided after placing some of them that we're going to use them absolutely everywhere on the build. And that's usually the way I do it. I sort of feel like I've finished something and then I find another little trick that I can use and end up going crazy with it. And then for the size of the building, I decided to use this same piece, but using lots of rotation and symmetry and stuff to get this really cool pattern. Definitely going to be using this sort of technique a lot more later on in the build of the park when I'm start like working on restaurants and entrance buildings and you know all that sort of detail, or rather all the sort of detail on those buildings. So now I get to the point where I can add some supports in and really go to town with the finer sort of details, adding absolutely loads of pillars in here. You can see I've also made a nice sort of detail piece on the front to add a bit of interest to the building, and I use the same piece on the sides as well. So I think that's something you do see in this style of architecture quite a lot of repetition of details that work well. So that's something that we're kind of going for, if that makes any sense. And then finally I wanted to theme up the front section of the platform with a little bit more detail. And it's funny really because the front section in a way is going to be the back, which doesn't really make any sense at all, but it's obviously the guests are going to enter from the other side, but this is the forward facing bit, which you're not going to see that well anyway from ground level because it's right up on a hill, but just for the sake of how the build looks, I wanted to give it this sort of level of detail. On the front facing bit, you're not really going to be looking at the back section of this building quite as much. So again, using the same pieces but scaling them up a little bit and giving them a little bit more height for some variation there, before finishing off with a spire type thing, I guess. Not a spire, but you know, a pole. And yeah, that's probably the best way to finish it all off. I just thought there's this fence post that I can use, and it's not exactly the same goal, but I've got it close enough that it kind of works. Now I just had to add some fencing and stuff like that around the edge of the platform and all the sorts of standard details. At this point I started doing a little bit more with the terrain. I felt that the building needed supporting a little bit more because it was kind of floating in the middle of the air, which wasn't ideal. So just raising the terrain up and then placing some more of the same rock work in. I believe these are the tropical rocks, same ones that we had in Planco 1, but I've used them pretty much everywhere in this area, and I feel like the style of rocks, like the shaping of the rocks, is so much better in this game. I think they're pretty much the same ones as in Planet Zoo, and everything like that is a lot better in Planet Zoo than Planet Coaster 1, so really fun to work with, really good shapes, especially the flat ones and the big sort of almost square type rocks that work perfectly for sinking in to terrain. And it's actually really fun to work with all the different levels of terrain in this build, and gives everything a lot more interest. When you're looking at it visually, it's just the height differences, especially on this particular build, are really quite impressive. I think it helps sort of elevate the building like this. Then I felt like I need a section at the back, another sort of overhanging roof section, just to cover up the platform where the guests walk up so they're not burning their feet in the hot sun. So I just copied the one from the front and then just tried to get the same detailing on it. It was a bit of a struggle, to be honest, working with this part, but yeah, got there in the end. And then this is pretty much the final thing that I do in the build, which is to sort out the queue line. Now there's an awful lot of queue line to work with, and officially it's not really a queue line, because the only bit that guests actually use it as a queue is the steps up to the slide, but they will have to wander up here to get to the slide. So essentially this is how a queue line would be for a water slide like this in real life. But because there's so much to work with, I didn't want to go crazy with the theming or detail here, so I just end up placing lots of rocks and fences all the way up. Well, the rock fence with another fence sunken into it, and I think that works out absolutely fine. From a distance it looks pretty good. And then any bits that are floating in the air I support with rock work again, and just try and tie everything nicely in together. Eventually we put a bit of foliage in there as well, and yeah, it just looks like I was checking in the flume there to make sure nothing had clipped through at all. But yeah, I've really enjoyed this second part of the build. It's actually come out probably quicker than I thought it would after the first episode. Yeah, I've enjoyed building this a lot more than the first episode, because I feel like we've already got stuff in the park now, so it's already like the ball's rolling, and I've had so much motivation to actually play the game, which is really great. The updates that we're getting always seem to bring quality of life improvements and lots of additional features, which is always good. We have got restaurants in the game now, of course, which will be definitely something very useful for this park at a later stage, but something that I haven't sort of looked at all really yet, but it's definitely something that I'll delve into at some point. And yeah, just looking forward really to seeing what's coming next with the park. I sort of felt like I was on a bit of a roll with this one and just kept working on it all week. I had a day off during the week, which I pretty much had most of the day to work on this build, and I felt like it was a day well spent, to be honest, because yeah, I really got something quite a lot done, filled up quite a large area of the park, and yeah, I've got loads of other ideas for the park, and don't know if we're going to be able to fit them all into the blueprint of the map, or the size rather of the map that we've got, but it'll be interesting to see sort of how I manage with this going forward. So I hope you've all enjoyed the video. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you all in the next one.